there's clearly a very, very intense technical debate. It's ideological. There are social signals. And for the average Bitcoin user that's not in the technical weeds and they don't know about knots and core and they don't know about classic and XT and unlimited and all these things, that can be a bit unnerving. So, is the mothership at risk? And what are the devs and the engineers and the keepers of the flame actually fighting about? And I think if we're able to sort of state that in plain terms, that would probably be a helpful level set right now.
Okay, so here's the thing: if there were a consensus, pun intended, opinion on that, then there wouldn't be this need for two clients, right? There's one camp that believes one thing. The NOS folks have their idea of the answer to that question. And the people who are just fine running core and are looking forward to upgrade to core v30 have another answer to that question. So we drew straws earlier before we came on stage, and I will be steel manning the NOTS version of it, and Dr. Back will be taking core's version of it. So who's going first? Do I have to...
Go ahead. What's at stake? I think it's helpful to start with the I don't want to say the adversary or the rebel cause.
Red teaming here?
You're the
All
empire
right.
now, Adam.
Let's see. So I will do my level best at steel manning the NOTS case and trying to make the argument for them. We tried to actually have a member of the NOTS/Ocean team because there seems to be a lot of overlap between those two crews come join us. Nobody was able to make it. So in their stead, wish me luck. Okay, so I believe that Bitcoin is the best form of money possible, and beyond that, that it's really only good as money, that everything else that you might want to use Bitcoin for degrades its ability to be the best money possible. If it's the best money possible and also you can use it to store artwork, that's great, but every bit of effort, whether that's technical effort, whether that's social effort, whether that's mining effort spent on storing artwork is effort that's not spent on the money case. And that's what's important to me. That's what I signed up for. That's why I've been doing this for so long. That's why I run a node. Why are people trying to suddenly take that away from me? Because I thought there was an implicit social contract that we always did things this way. Now I'm noticing that recent revisions to core have been made such that it's actually much easier to store data on the blockchain arbitrarily. In fact, they seem to be catering to that use case. At the very least, they're not speaking out against it. They seem to be tacitly accepting it. I never signed up for this. This isn't the reason I'm involved in this. Why isn't anyone else on my side?
Well done. Yeah.
All right.
I just can't believe you did that without saying ordinals or child porn. That's incredible.
He's not the real pope,
What's that?
He's not the real pope.
Okay, yeah. We'll get to that. All right. Adam, and the core's response to that.
Well, I think that the developers have been having a long-running battle with spam. So when I first got involved in sort of Bitcoin details was in 2013, and there was already, I guess there was something previous that Johnny Beer had posted, I mentioned, from 2010. But so when I got into it, there was still the same kind of discussion going on, I guess. And that was that application developers were generally lazy. And if they were building an application, like a mobile phone app or something, that wanted to transact Bitcoin, and they wanted to coordinate something between their application, like a message or a hash or a little bit of data, they wouldn't do it via mobile phone push notification. They just stick it right in the chain, and there was no op return, and so they'd use up, whatever hack they could find, like fake PubKeys and things, and that was intensely annoying to the developers because they figured it was going to, confuse the node, overload the node's memory for their memory cache, and was generally wasteful. And you've got to bear in mind that people working on the protocol had spent thousands of hours saving bytes here and there to pack just a tiny bit more transactions in per block. I think enormous amount of time was used trying to save 1 byte on the signature or something. So then when somebody wakes up and puts, a 10 kilobyte JPEG in there, that's kind of annoying, right? It doesn't help the monetary use, and people are here because Bitcoin is unseizable bearer money that changes humanity. So it's sort of a bit disappointing when people choose to put graffiti all over it. So I think from that point of view, the Knots view and the Bitcoin developer view is pretty similar. And actually, I mean, there's a kind of almost more militant version of it that I subscribe to, and I think many of the early developers that were around at that time did, which is that, you know, not only would they be annoyed by image files, but they would be annoyed by somebody putting, you know, 30 bytes in there to send an app coordination message, because from that point of view as well, if you're writing an app, you should have your own way to communicate between your app, you know, send any emails, send a push notification, run a web server to coordinate it. You know, why do you need to use the Bitcoin transaction network as an application message bus? That's not what it's designed for. Now that's stored forever and displaces a transaction because you couldn't be bothered to, you know, write your application in a normal way. And so, you know, all kinds of efforts were extended to persuade application developers not to do that, including, you know, shouting at them and trying to explain to them how you could do it in a less inefficient way. And effectively, after, I guess at that point, 4 years of that, it was just found that nothing works. Laziness is an extremely corrosive force, and no amount of shouting or explaining was going to do anything. And hence came about the op return garbage bin, which was, well, if you can't stop them doing it, annoying as that is, I guess we should create somewhere for them to put it, suggest it's not very, you know, make it small, so encourage them not to do a lot of it, and make it low impact on the node. So that's where the op return comes in. There was a previous op return that did something completely different, that got disused, so it got repurposed, I think, something like that. And so I think originally it was 40 bytes. So a hash is generally a very flexible thing because you can hash a lot of data sent somewhere else or stored somewhere else. So I think the 40 bytes idea was a hash plus a few extra bytes for some programming purpose. And that was the original. And there was some more complicated argument that 80 bytes might be needed in some case. So it ended up being 80 bytes and a bit. And now, unfortunately, it was that was policy, so it wasn't strongly enforced. So I think the actual validity or consensus rule was a megabyte. That's like no limit, the size of a block. And then there's another limit, which is, I'm not sure exactly when the other limit was introduced. It might have been later, which is 100 kilobytes was the maximum size for a transaction. And so, you know, when people complain about 100 kilobyte op returns, that's been consensus valid since 2014. Actually, 1 megabyte is consensus valid. And it wasn't really used because, you know, there's a few op returns, but as soon as, I think there just wasn't that much demand. There were like the odd bit of spam, or, you know, somebody would post a copy of the Bitcoin white paper, or Luke posted some Bible verses for some reason. I think he might have put them in a Coinbase, but I'm not sure the full details. But people would post things once in a while. Somebody get married and they put something in there, you know. So people would just stick things in there for fun. And because of the op return, you could put a text string in it as well, in a transaction, or you could put things in the Coinbase. The Coinbase doesn't actually take any space because it's a fixed size.
Or it could be a hash to something else, like open timestamps, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
The concept of using the Bitcoin blockchain as a notary.
Yeah, I mean, the open timestamps uses a hash as well, so that uses block space. And I think there is an argument that if you want to timestamp something or connect a Bitcoin transaction to, you know, a sales receipt or something, maybe you do kind of need that. It depends, you know. You can, if you've sent the, you know, the PDF for what they've paid for in an email, you can technically check something without using any blockchain data. But there's some other cases where you can't. I think a timestamp is probably a low controversy case where you can't just, you know, hide the hash inside the transaction, because then you don't know what the hash is, and then you have to find the checksum somewhere else. So if you want the blockchain to enable you to find a checksum, then you kind of have to put it there, right? So, and then, you know, I think people want to know sort of why was there suddenly a lot of spam. So, you know, then we had SegWit with the discount, which basically gave you a bigger block, and that was in 2017, after the aforementioned big block fork drama. and then Taproot in 2021. So I think it wasn't until 2022, 2023 that we saw this massive spam wave. And so some people are drawing that connection between the introduction of Taproot and the start of the spam. So they will argue that Taproot is a bug. But actually, I believe that's like correlation, not cause, because there was a altcoin bear market, and Trammell Ventures, which is Dustin Trammell's VC firm, who was a very early miner, 2009. They published a report saying that the VC funding levels in the altcoins had dropped enormously, like 90% or something, and the Bitcoin layer 2 VC funding had doubled. And so, altcoins like money, so they rebranded as Bitcoin layer 2s. There were 2 or 3 Bitcoin layer 2s, and now there are 30. Most of them are altcoins in sheep's clothing, claiming to be Bitcoin layer 2s. If you see anything about Bitcoin OS, saying positive things about Bitcoin, if you search it, it's an altcoin, right?
It's Cardano.
That's the one. And there are more doing similar things. And unfortunately,